Ethan Rowley, Alina Mercer, and her protective mother Clara Mercer. 3 lives tied together by love, fear, and a secret so small it should have never destroyed anything. Yet it ignited one of the most shocking tragedies their quiet UK town had ever seen. Please subscribe for daily new update of crime story and watch till end. Ethan Rowley grew up in a quiet part of Yorkshire, where most people knew each other by name, and life moved at a predictable pace. He lived in a modest brick house near the edge of town, spending most of his days working as an electrician. His routine was simple, almost mechanical: early mornings, long shifts, and evenings spent fixing things around the house, or scrolling through his phone in silence. He was not an expressive man, but those who knew him described him as reliable, careful, and steady. That stability was what attracted Alina Mercer to him in the first place. She came from a warm, tight-knit family who owned a small craft business. Unlike Ethan, she was gentle and bright, always trying to make people feel included. When Alina and Ethan met at a charity event her mother organized, their differences seemed charming rather than troubling. She enjoyed his calm presence, and he admired her kindness. Their relationship grew quickly, and within a year they were married. The wedding was simple and intimate, held in Alina's parents' garden, surrounded by handmade decorations and close relatives. At first, their home life seemed peaceful. They moved into a small rental house near Ethan's job, and Alina decorated it with soft colors and small wooden crafts she made herself. Neighbors often saw them walking together to the shops, and although Ethan rarely spoke, Alina's cheerful energy made up for the silence. People assumed they were happy, and in many ways, they were, at least on the surface. Things began to change when Alina announced she was pregnant. Ethan was proud, but surprised, immediately imagining a future that looked very different from the one he had expected. He had always held traditional views about family roles, and believed that having a son first was important for reasons even he could not clearly explain. When Alina told him she thought the baby might be a boy, he latched onto the idea with excitement he had never shown before. He began telling co-workers, buying small blue clothes, and imagining teaching his future child everything he knew about fixing things. This new joy softened his temper temporarily, and for a while their home felt more hopeful than it had in months. As the pregnancy progressed, Alina attended most medical appointments with her mother instead of Ethan. She said it was easier for scheduling, and Ethan didn't question it at first. He trusted her, or at least believed he did. But slowly, small cracks began forming: missed calls, vague explanations, and quiet moments where she seemed distant. Still, whenever she returned home, she smiled and tried to keep the atmosphere calm. Ethan sensed something shifting, but he convinced himself that every pregnant woman changed a little. He ignored the unease in his stomach, and focused on his growing excitement about becoming a father. To outsiders, everything still looked normal. They saw a young couple preparing for their first child, decorating a small nursery, and taking slow evening walks. No one noticed the tension forming quietly beneath the surface. No one saw how deeply Ethan's expectations were shaping his emotions, and no one imagined that a secret hidden inside a folded medical report would soon fracture everything they had built, turning their peaceful life into the beginning of a tragedy neither family could have predicted. As Alina's pregnancy continued, the weight of her secret grew heavier each day. She had always planned to tell Ethan the truth eventually, but every time she imagined his reaction, she froze. Ethan had made it painfully clear how much having a son meant to him. He spoke about it with pride, telling co-workers how his little boy would learn his trade, help him around the workshop someday, and carry on the Rowley name. He didn't say these things with warmth, but with a strong certainty that made Alina nervous. Each time he spoke about the baby as if the gender were already fixed, she felt an invisible pressure tighten around her. She had learned at an early scan that the baby was likely a girl, but she hid the result out of fear, telling herself it wasn't truly lying, just postponing a difficult moment. She convinced herself it would be better to wait until the final scan or even the birth itself, allowing him time to adjust naturally. But the truth didn't get easier to face. Instead, it grew more frightening. Her mother noticed changes in her small signs at first, like how she would lose her appetite whenever Ethan was mentioned, or how she overreacted to minor remarks. One afternoon, while Alina was helping arrange craft supplies in the family workshop, her mother gently asked if something was wrong. Alina brushed it off quickly, saying she was only tired from the pregnancy. She didn't want to worry anyone, especially since her parents had always been protective. She feared they would urge her to confront Ethan or push her to move back home temporarily, something she wasn't ready to do yet. She wanted to believe she could fix things on her own, that the issue wasn't as big as it felt inside her mind. As the weeks passed, the guilt of withholding the truth made her more withdrawn. She found excuses to attend appointments without Ethan, insisting that his work schedule made it easier if she went with her mother. Ethan initially accepted this explanation, but a small part of him wondered why she didn't want him there. When he asked casual questions about the scans, she gave brief, rehearsed answers. Her voice always held a slight tremor, but he didn't press her for more information. He trusted her enough not to imagine that she was concealing something so important. However, Alina noticed how his attachment to the idea of having a son grew stronger. He decorated the nursery with blue paint and small wooden shelves shaped like cars. He told her he had already chosen a name, one taken from his grandfather. Alina tried to gently suggest waiting until the final scan to be certain, but Ethan brushed it aside, saying he already knew the baby was a boy. His confidence frightened her, because it meant the truth would be far more painful when it finally came out. She began having sleepless nights, lying awake while Ethan slept beside her, unaware of the storm quietly forming. The secret changed the way she moved through each day. Every small decision felt like part of a careful balancing act. She avoided discussions about the baby's future, and tried to distract Ethan by focusing on practical tasks. But even everyday moments felt heavier. Shopping for baby items, preparing meals, answering innocent questions from neighbors. She carried the truth like a hidden weight, hoping that somehow the situation would resolve itself before the tension grew too sharp to control. Deep down she feared what Ethan might become once the truth reached him, yet she held on to a fragile hope that love would soften whatever anger he might feel. But with every week that passed, the distance between them grew silently wider, setting the stage for the tragedy that would soon unfold. Ethan never considered himself an emotional man, yet the moment he saw the medical folder lying half-open in the hallway cupboard, something inside him shifted. He hadn't been searching for anything important, only a charger he thought Alina might have tucked away somewhere. But the sight of his name written on the appointment papers caught his eye. He picked up the folder without hesitation, assuming it held routine notes. As he flipped through the pages, his attention sharpened. The words were clinical and printed clearly, fetal gender identified as female. For a moment his mind didn't fully register what he was reading. He blinked, reread the lines, and then felt his stomach twist sharply. The realization settled like a heavy stone. The baby he had believed to be a boy, the child he had told everyone about, was actually a girl. It wasn't uncertainty or a possible error. The report was dated weeks earlier, long enough that Alina had chosen to hide it. His hands shook slightly as he closed the folder. The quiet house around him suddenly felt tense, as if something had broken. He sat down on the edge of the bed and tried to understand why she had lied. His thoughts spiraled quickly, jumping to conclusions shaped by disappointment and pride. He imagined that she had laughed about him with her mother, or kept the truth from him deliberately to humiliate him. The lie felt personal, sharper than any argument or mistake they had ever made. It wasn't just about the baby's gender, it was about trust, respect, and the life he believed they were building. He felt foolish, as if everyone else had known except him. Anger began filling the spaces where reason should have been. In the days that followed, his behavior changed dramatically. He ate little, slept poorly, and spent hours sitting in silence, staring at the nursery walls he had painted himself. The blue color that once filled him with pride now taunted him. Each brushstroke felt like a reminder of how deeply he had been deceived. He imagined the moment when he had told his coworkers, He was having a son, and the excitement he had shared with his family. Now, he replayed each moment with embarrassment, convinced that he had been living a lie without realizing it. As his resentment grew, he began questioning everything else Alina had told him. He searched through drawers, looked at her messages, and watched her movements with suspicion. Every friendly smile she gave her mother, every quiet phone call, every appointment she attended without him now felt like part of a larger deception. Instead of confronting her, Ethan withdrew into himself. The silence in the house grew heavy and unsettling. Alina sensed something was wrong, but couldn't understand the depth of his distress. Ethan convinced himself that if she had lied once, she could lie again, and soon he began imagining scenarios far worse than reality. His thoughts darkened, filling with a mix of betrayal and fear of losing control over his life. The gender of the baby, once a simple detail, became an emotional trigger that he clung to obsessively. It was easier to focus on the lie than to acknowledge his own insecurities or the fragility of the relationship he had taken for granted. As his inner turmoil grew sharper, the man he had always been, steady, predictable, restrained, began to slip away, replaced by someone driven by wounded pride and a dangerous, growing obsession. Alina felt the atmosphere in the house changing long before she understood the reason behind it. Ethan moved through rooms like a shadow, quieter than usual, watching her with a strange intensity that made her uneasy. He no longer asked about her day or offered to help with small chores, and when she spoke to him, he responded with short, clipped answers. The warmth he once showed when touching her stomach had vanished. Instead, he kept a distance as if something had built a wall between them. Alina tried to ignore it at first, blaming stress or exhaustion, but the tension became impossible to overlook. She felt as though she was walking on thin ice, unsure where the cracks would appear. Her parents noticed her change in mood when she visited them one afternoon. She moved slowly, distracted, and her mother sensed the burden she was carrying. While they prepared lunch together, her mother gently asked if everything was all right. Alina forced a smile and insisted she was only tired from the pregnancy, but her mother didn't believe it. She didn't push further, yet she made it clear that Alina was always welcome to stay with them whenever she needed a break. The offer lingered in Alina's mind long after she returned home. That night, Ethan arrived late from work. He barely looked at her as he entered the house, brushing past her with a coldness she had never felt from him before. She tried to explain that she had been feeling unwell, hoping he might soften, but he remained distant. The silence between them stretched painfully, becoming heavier as days passed. She sensed something was deeply wrong, but without understanding the cause, she felt powerless to fix it. Every attempt at conversation was met with detachment. His eyes carried a hardness she couldn't interpret, and his unpredictable mood left her too afraid to ask questions. As the feeling of safety slowly faded, Alina began to think more seriously about her parents' offer. She told herself it would only be temporary, a few nights to rest, to clear her head, and to allow Ethan some space. Maybe distance would help them reset. She packed a small bag quietly while Ethan was in the shower, choosing not to take much to avoid alarming him. When she told him she planned to stay with her parents for a few days, his expression tightened. But he didn't argue. The lack of resistance frightened her more than any angry outburst could have. It felt unnatural, like he had already disconnected from her entirely. When she arrived at her parents' home, relief washed over her. The familiar living room, warm lighting, and gentle voices made her feel safe again. Her mother insisted she take the guest room and rest. Her father, though concerned, respected her privacy and didn't ask for details. For the first time in weeks, she slept soundly, yet a sense of guilt shadowed her relief. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was left unresolved, and she worried about the growing divide between her and Ethan. Unbeknownst to her, Ethan interpreted her decision very differently. He saw her leaving as an act of desertion, a deliberate punishment meant to shame him further. Instead of calming him, her absence fed every dark thought already brewing in his mind. The distance she hoped would ease the tension only deepened his resentment, creating a dangerous emotional storm he was no longer able to control. Ethan spent the days after Alina left, drifting through his routines like a man trapped inside his own mind. The house felt empty, but not in a peaceful way. Every corner reminded him of her absence, and every reminder fueled the belief that she had abandoned him intentionally. He replayed moments from their marriage, searching for signs he might have missed. The more he thought about the hidden scan report, the more convinced he became that she had been planning to deceive him all along. Logic slipped away as his emotions sharpened into anger, and that anger began shaping his thoughts. He imagined her at her parents' home, surrounded by people who had never liked him, discussing his faults and laughing at his expense. These ideas had no basis in reality, but in his fragile state, they grew roots and flourished. He stopped going to work, claiming illness, and spent hours sitting in the half-finished nursery. The blue walls seemed to close in on him, pressing reminders of the lie he believed she had crafted. He ran his hands over the wooden crib he had built himself, imagining the child he thought he was preparing for. The contrast between the future he had envisioned and the truth he believed Alina had hidden twisted something inside him. He felt cheated, stripped of the dream he had held so tightly. What had once been anticipation now simmered as resentment, and every breath he took in that room intensified the storm building inside him. In the late hours of the night, he began to drive aimlessly. He wandered the empty roads, letting the cold air from the open window hit his face as he searched for a way to quiet his thoughts. But the quiet only made the noise in his mind louder. The idea of confronting Alina began to grow stronger, pushed by the belief that she owed him an explanation. He convinced himself that she had run to her parents' house, not for rest or support, but to escape responsibility for her lies. He imagined her comfortable and relaxed while he suffered alone. The longer he focused on that thought, the more unbearable it became. On the night everything changed. Ethan drove farther than he usually did. He parked near a small wooded area and walked around in circles, his mind racing. The decision to go to Alina's parents' home did not come suddenly. It built slowly, fueled by hours of brooding and wounded pride. He convinced himself he only wanted answers, that he needed to hear the truth directly from her. But underneath that thin layer of justification was a deeper darkness he refused to acknowledge. By the time he turned the car toward her parents' home, the line between reason and rage had blurred beyond recognition. He parked several streets away, unwilling to alert anyone by arriving too close. The night was cold, and the sky held no moon. He walked toward the house with heavy steps, his breath visible in the air. The property was quiet, every window dark except the one in the guest room, where a soft yellow light glowed faintly behind the curtains. Seeing that light ignited something sharp inside him. It was the final spark that burned away whatever restraint he had left. Ethan approached the house with a sense of grim inevitability. His heart pounded, not with fear but with a distorted sense of purpose. He told himself he deserved the truth, that she owed him honesty after everything she had hidden. By the time he reached the back door, any thought of a calm confrontation had already vanished. What awaited inside was a tragedy shaped by misunderstanding, pride, and a spiral of emotions that neither of them had been able to stop. The quiet countryside night, so still and peaceful, was only moments away from being broken forever. Detectives arrived at the Mercer property just after sunrise, stepping carefully around the area where the night's chaos had unfolded. The usually peaceful countryside home was now sealed with police tape, lights flashing against the early morning fog. Officers moved in and out quietly, their faces tense as they worked to uncover what had led to the sudden eruption of violence. News of the tragedy spread quickly through the small Yorkshire community, leaving residents shocked that such a horrific event had taken place in a house known for warmth and family gatherings. The investigation began immediately, with teams photographing the scene, collecting evidence, and interviewing shaken family members who were still trying to understand how everything had gone so terribly wrong. Alina's parents could barely speak. They moved between tears and stunned silence as they recounted the events of the night. They explained how they had been asleep when they heard a disturbance coming from the guest room. By the time they reached the door, the damage was already done and Ethan was gone. Their grief was compounded by confusion. They had known Ethan as a quiet man, distant but never openly hostile. They never imagined he could be capable of such violence. Detectives wrote down every detail they could, aware that the family's accounts would be crucial in piecing together Ethan's state of mind leading up to the crime. Investigators turned their attention to the couple's home next. Inside, the atmosphere felt heavy, as if the walls held the tension that had slowly built between Ethan and Alina. Officers noted the untouched meals, the unmade bed, and the blue nursery filled with small baby clothes, neatly folded in drawers. The painted walls and handmade crib revealed the depth of Ethan's attachment to the idea of a son. Detectives found the medical folder tucked into a pile of scattered papers, opened to the scan report that identified the baby as a girl. To them, it was a clear indicator of the emotional trigger behind the tragedy. They photographed it carefully, understanding that it held a key part of the story. After searching the house further, detectives discovered signs of Ethan's declining mental state, scribbled notes filled with angry thoughts, half-finished messages on his phone, and missed calls from his workplace, asking why he hadn't shown up. It became clear that he had been unraveling long before the night of the crime. They traced his movements over the previous days through CCTV footage, public sightings, and his phone's location data, noticing patterns of aimless driving and long periods spent in isolation. With each detail they gathered, the picture of his emotional collapse grew sharper. A search team was deployed across the surrounding region, focusing on remote areas where Ethan might have gone. Helicopters flew low over fields and forests, while officers on foot combed through abandoned buildings, railway paths, and wooded areas. The community was urged to stay indoors and report any sightings. Tension spread as people realized Ethan was still out there, unstable and unpredictable. Every hour that passed increased the urgency of finding him. As evidence continued to build, detectives pieced together the chain of events that had led to the tragedy. What emerged was a story of secrecy, misunderstanding, and deep emotional turmoil. The investigation revealed that the crime had not been planned in advance, but triggered by a series of escalating thoughts that Ethan had been unable to control. The officers understood that locating him quickly was crucial, not only for justice, but to prevent him from harming himself or someone else. The hunt intensified, and the quiet Yorkshire countryside transformed into the center of a desperate search for a man consumed by guilt, confusion, and a grief he had brought upon himself. Ethan was eventually located 2 days after the tragedy, though it felt much longer to the officers searching and to the families waiting in dread. A farmer in a nearby village had reported seeing a man hiding near an old storage shed that hadn't been used in years. The structure stood alone at the edge of a field, weathered by rain and wind, surrounded by tall grass that swayed like a barrier against the outside world. By the time police arrived, Ethan was inside, sitting on the cold floor with his back against the wall, looking thin, exhausted, and hollow. He did not resist when officers entered. There was no attempt to flee, no anger left in him, only a quiet resignation that settled over the room like a heavy fog. His clothes were damp from the night air, and his hands trembled as he was escorted out and placed into custody. The search was over, but the real unraveling of what had happened was just beginning. During questioning, Ethan did not deny his actions. His voice was flat, stripped of emotion, as he explained what he believed had driven him to that moment. He spoke about the scan report, the lie he felt had shattered everything he had trusted, and the spiral of thoughts he couldn't escape. Detectives, listening to him, noted the deep confusion behind his words, the distorted beliefs that had fueled his anger. But the most striking detail emerged later, when investigators reviewed the full set of medical records collected from the clinic. In those documents, the truth was revealed. A follow-up scan had corrected the initial reading. The baby that Ethan and Alina were expecting was actually a boy. The earlier scan had been unclear, a common occurrence, and the updated report confirmed the corrected gender. The information had been recorded 2 weeks before the tragedy, but Ethan had never seen it. The one truth that could have stopped everything never reached him. When detectives confronted him with the corrected report, he stared at the paper for a long time, unable to comprehend what he was seeing. The reality settled slowly, like a weight pressing down on his chest. The child he thought had been withheld from him, the symbol of pride he believed he had lost, had been the son he always wanted. The lie he had convinced himself Alina told had never existed. The betrayal he believed had justified his rage had been nothing more than a misunderstanding built on his own assumptions. The shock hollowed him further, leaving him with a silence so deep that even the officers in the room felt it. He eventually lowered the paper and closed his eyes, unable to face the enormity of what he had done. News of the revelation spread quickly through the investigation team and eventually to the Mercer family, deepening their grief. The tragedy that had already shattered their world now carried an even heavier weight. A life had been lost not because of deception, but because of fear, miscommunication, and the fragile nature of human emotion. It became a devastating reminder of how quickly assumptions can spiral into irreversible consequences. As the case moved forward, the community struggled to make sense of the events. People who had known Ethan as a quiet, hard-working man found it difficult to reconcile that image with the reality of what had happened. The story became more than a crime. It became a cautionary tale about unspoken fears, hidden truths, and the destructive power of unchecked emotions. In the end, there were no victories, only loss. Alina's family mourned a daughter whose life had been cut short, and Ethan faced the lifelong weight of a truth discovered far too late. The tragedy left behind a silence that lingered in the community long after the investigation closed, a powerful reminder that sometimes the most devastating outcomes grow from misunderstandings that should have been resolved with a single, honest moment.